Welcome again to Chalice Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of the Conejo Valley, where we welcome all persons of goodwill. For tonight's community forum, Immigration Laws and Enforcement, how we went from open borders to ICE. With Dr. Jose Alamillo, Professor and Program Chair of Chicano Studies at Cal State University Channel Islands, and panelists from MICOP, CAIR-LA, CAIR-LA, SURJ-VC, CAUSE, and Buen Vecino. Don't worry, our panelists will let you hear the full names when they speak to you later. And thank you to Buen Vecino for being our co-sponsor tonight. We're honored to have you all with us. And now I'd like to invite you all to take a deep breath and be present as we light the chalice of our Unitarian Universalist faith. Our mission is to nurture spiritually courageous people who transform the world through justice and compassion. Chalice recognizes and acknowledges the first people of this ancestral and unceded territory, the Chumash, who have been here for at least 11,000 years. We honor their elders and descendants, past and present. We recognize that the Chumash are still here and are committed to honoring their stories, culture, and community. Dr. Jose Alamillo is Professor and Program Chair of Chicano Studies at California State University, Channel Islands. Born in Zacatecas, Mexico, and raised in Ventura County, his family worked in the year-round lemon industry. Dr. Alamillo's research focuses on the ways Mexican immigrants and Mexican Americans have used culture, leisure, and sports to build community and social networks to advance politically and economically in the US. He's involved students in community service learning projects, such as collecting oral histories of ex-Braceros. Dr. Alamillo has been a friend of Chalice for many years. In 2012, before 24 of our members went to the Justice General Assembly in Phoenix, where they attended a mass demonstration at Sheriff Joe Arpaio's infamous Tent City, Dr. Alamillo led 2 workshops here entitled Immigration as a Moral Issue. He also brought us a powerful event about the Braceros program. Dr. Alamillo has authored several books and is a member of Buen Vecino of the Conejo Valley. Dr. Alamillo.
Thank you, Randall. Thank you, Randall, and everybody for inviting me today. I would like to now share with you a presentation that I prepared. So if you can hopefully see this presentation, it's going to be a brief presentation on U.S. laws and enforcement. Since 2008, I have taught a course on my campus called Contemporary Immigration Issues. And it's one of those courses that has really made me much more empathetic and more understanding about the issues that many of my students and their families face, and especially when it comes to immigration issues. So for today, I would like to talk about mostly the immigration enforcement part of our immigration law, because there's just so many laws that I could speak on. But for today, I'm going to be speaking on really the enforcement mandate of immigration law. And the enforcement mandate is predominant, more so than the service mandate, which is involved mostly with naturalization. And so let's get started. So When we define immigration enforcement, we have to think about the regulation of those who violate provisions of immigration laws. And that's how I'm defining it for the purpose of this presentation. Now, there's many different types of enforcements. There's border enforcement along the US-Mexico border, which is the main duty of the Border Patrol. There's visa controls and screening, which is surveillance. There's the interior enforcement, and you know this when you travel, say, to San Diego, and there's a stop there, usually patrolling the interior enforcement, locating and arresting non-citizens, typically known as immigration raids, and investigating smuggling and trafficking. But for today, I want to talk about two main aspects of immigration enforcement, and that is detention of immigrants and removal or deportation of immigrants. So let's get started with the deportation of immigrants. So there's three different types of deportations. But at first, I like to note that most of us think about the US as a nation of immigrants, but when you think about the history of deportation in the United States, it could be mostly defined as a nation of deported immigrants, meaning that this country has deported more than 57 million people since 1882. And this is more than any other country in the world. So there's a long history of deportation that we need to understand. And so there's three different types. First, there's formal deportation. That is by formal order from an immigration judge, right? And this represents a smaller number of the grand total of deportees. The second is voluntary departure. And this actually represents the majority of expulsions, which is about 90%. And this is typically done through an administrative process called voluntary departure. And it's similar to like a plea bargain, if you think about what a voluntary departure is. Primarily, it's also less costly when this voluntary departure is conducted. And then there's also this third one called self-deportation. And this is when people ultimately decide to just pick up and leave without ever coming in contact with immigration authorities. And this is largely due to the fear campaigns that's going on in the community. Let me begin with the first immigration law, 1882. This is really the very beginning of what we can think about immigration enforcement. At the federal level, here we have the Chinese becoming the first group to be excluded based on race and class. But what this law also did is it created a new federal bureaucracy. First it was called the Immigration Bureau, and then it becomes the Immigration Naturalization Service. And then in 2003, it becomes Immigration Customs and Enforcement, which is known as ICE. And what this law also did is it established a process of deportation. And this law continued in the books for 61 years. Even though, it was considered a temporary, it was extended all the way until 1943 when it was repealed finally. So this next law that comes into the books is really important because this is where we really see the racist dimensions of our immigration system. The 1892 Geary Act required all Chinese to register with the US government or be subject to arrest and imprisonment and a formal deportation. Now, to qualify to get a certificate, they had to prove that they were in the country prior to 1892. But what they also had to do is they had to get an affidavit with a white witness. So it couldn't be a non-white person or else they would not get a certificate. And so this is one of the most racist provisions of this act that is important to note. Now, this GEARI Act did not provide a lot of funding towards enforcement. So it left it to the local citizen committees to essentially raid Chinatowns and mount a campaign to oust and create a fear campaign in the communities to get Chinese out of their communities. And so the Chinese did not just sit back, they fought back. They used the legal system, and there's two important court cases that I like to mention because these court cases are important because they provided legal challenges. And so in 1893, you have the Fang Yutang versus the United States, and then later you have the 1896 Wang Ming versus the United States. But the first case, it ruled against the Chinese men claiming that deportation was not a punishment, but rather an administrative procedure. And this is really important because to this day, this is what is considered an administrative procedure or a method of enforcing the return of his own country of an alien. This is the quote from this Supreme Court ruling. Despite some dissent, this case placed deportation of non-citizens beyond the Constitution. So the key point is that to this day, deportation is not legally considered punishment at all, and neither is immigrant detention, which I will speak to in a few minutes. And so that is lacking due process rights. And so the 1896 case extended plenary power to immigrant detention in this court case. What is plenary power? This is a concept that's really important because plenary power is the state's expansive sovereign authority over non-citizens. So they claim that detention was not imprisonment in a legal sense, but again, an administrative procedure leading to the ultimate deportation of many Chinese during this period. So moving forward, we have in the 1930s, mass deportation campaign, and in part had to do with the Great Depression. And I like to note that, in Ventura County, we also had mass deportation campaigns. So you see the headlines on the left with the Los Angeles Spanish language newspaper and the headlines of the many raids that were happening in the Los Angeles downtown, in the Placita Park. You had approximately 1.8 million people deported. The majority, almost 60%, were US citizens, meaning that these were US-born American citizens of Mexican descent, but ultimately left with their parents. And so it's really important to note that this was happening here locally in Oxnard. When you look at the Ventura County Star-Free Press, and this article talks about the 50 men that were, in Oxnard jail and were said to be deported because, again, they were considered illegally residing in the U.S. So they were rounded up and then ultimately deported. And then you move into the 1950s, and you have Operation Wetback. Now, this was a mass targeting of Mexicans that happened under the Immigration Naturalization Service. So unlike the 1930s, where it was really local, federal, and state working together for the mass deportations of many Mexicans that were in the US, in Operation Wetback was really more led by the INS. And this happened over a period of 1954, 1 year, and it approximately sent back over 1 million Mexicans back to the border. Now, what's interesting is that many ultimately came back. So they just essentially, the reason why they were deported to the border is that they wanted to administratively basically make them legal migrants through enrolling in the Bracero program, because during the 1950s, you have the guest worker program, also known as the Bracero program. And because in the Bracero program, you had legal migrants coming in for a small period to work. But many others who couldn't get into the Bracero program came here as undocumented. And so you had a large number of undocumented that were ultimately rounded up in 1954 and sent back to Mexico. So moving forward into the 90s, you have the 1996 laws, and these two laws that I want to talk about are important because they also are laws that continue to affect many of my students and their families to this day. So first, you have the Legal Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act, and then the other law passed during the Clinton administration was the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act. Now, these laws had a great impact on the U.S. immigrant detention system because it expanded the list of the aggravated felonies. And so essentially it arbitrarily detained people for minor infractions, such as false documents, or maybe something that you did as a young kid and as a teenager. But now they basically were retroactive, these laws, and so they become really punitive for many of these individuals that were here, and ultimately it led to fast-track deportations, family separations, and arbitrary detention. And this particular law, right, affected many of our individuals. One that I want to highlight that many of you may be familiar, and that's Liliana. Liliana, who many of us know, was essentially placed on an expedited removal in 2007. And she, essentially tried to legalize her status. And then because she had a record, where she falsely presented false information to immigration authorities, because, she was young, she didn't know, what she was, in what situation she found herself in. Ultimately, she sought assistance and help from our local churches. And so here you have the Simi Valley United Church of Christ becoming a key place of sanctuary. So for 3 years, they sheltered her. And of course, you have the CLU, Ventura County, helping in sheltering and protecting Liliana from deportation. And so 2016, because of the assistance and help from our local organizations, but especially the Simi Valley Church and CLU, she received her green card, and she's now pursuing college education. So here's to say really the importance of this new sanctuary movement that we're all seeing and becoming part of. Now, I want to shift to talking about the detention of immigrants, because this is also another aspect of our enforcement mandate in our laws. So we know a lot about our Ellis Island, because of course you might have visited, it's a museum, I certainly have. Now, what people don't know is this was considered a first immigration detention facility. And it was really more of an island prison if you think about it, because when you look at the history of Ellis Island, you would know that many immigrants actually died in this island, either by suicide or health-related causes. And despite the inscription of the Statue of Liberty, we have to really question, when we see these images. And here you have two images, one in Ellis Island on the left, and one more recently at the border, when you have families, right, being separated and detained. So you have to really question Ellis Island when we visit that this is really not just a place for, thinking about, our nation as a nation of immigrants, right? But it's also a detention facility as well. And we know also about Angel Island, because Angel Island also was a detention facility for many immigrants. It was built in 1910, and it was also responsible for not only admitting, screening, detaining, and also deporting immigrants, mostly Asian immigrants. So you had many from China, from Japan that went through Angel Island. And they also had very oppressive conditions. Here you have images of them being screened, because that was one of the requirements of medical inspections. And many of them, were subjected to oppressive conditions, generally from 2 to 6 months on this island. And some of them were never allowed to enter, but ultimately deported. And there's a great book that goes into more detail about this island, Angel Island. We also need to talk about the 1924 immigration law, also known as the Johnson-Reed Act, because this law ushered the most restrictive immigration era in U.S. history. It lifted time limits for deportation. enabling the removal of many non-citizens who entered the US without authorization or without a valid visa, regardless of how long they lived here. And one of the things that it did is impose a system of national quotas that limited the total numbers of immigrants coming in per year. And when you look at the actual, quota systems, you basically see that most of those quotas were reserved for European immigrants. So it was definitely, this law was really about designing the racial makeup of the United States by using the 1890 census as the basis for the quotas. Not the 1920, which would make sense, right? The most recent census, but the 1890 was used because in 1890, it was much more about white nation. It was then 1920. And so you also had immigration inspection requirements where you had to have a literacy test, a medical exam, and then pay a head tax of $18. Now, this had already been introduced in 1917, but it was just basically institutionalized it even more in 1924. The law also established the U.S. Border Patrol. And what's interesting about the 1924 is that it exempted immigrants from Western Hemisphere, Canada and Mexico. And this is important when I talk about the local Ventura County response to this. Now, a lot of people were very upset that there was no quota placed on Mexico. So you had John Box from Texas, who proposed this bill in 1926 called the Box Bill. Now, what's interesting about this Box Bill was actually to basically place Mexico under the quota system, limiting immigration from that country to 2%. Ultimately, it failed because, as you'll see in this newspaper article on the right, many of the agribusinesses came out against this bill. So you have A.C. Hardison, right, a well-known local Santa Paula citrus rancher, right? And he basically here he's quoted as being in opposition to the Box Bill. But it wasn't just the citrus growers in Ventura County, you had the sugar beet grower also coming out against it. And so you have many articles in the local press really basically saying that this will hurt their labor force. We need Mexicans for labor. We cannot put a quota on Mexico. And so what happens ultimately is a compromise. So 1929, you have this relatively unknown law called the 1929 Undesirable Aliens Act. This is the law that made crossing the US-Mexico border a crime. Section 1325 of this law basically says if you unlawfully enter a country for the first time, it would be a misdemeanor punished by 1 year in prison and $1,000 fine. If you do it twice, meaning if you re-enter, it's called unlawful re-entry, it would be considered a felony, punished by 2 years in prison and $1,000 fine. Now, this was actually led by Senator Coleman Blease, what I consider the Trump of the 1920s, because he was a white supremacist from South Carolina. He was really touting the separation of races, very much a believer in racial genetics at that time. And this compromise ultimately has an impact locally because ultimately the agribusiness lobby agrees with 1920 and they go along with it. Why? Because they can actually use deportation as a means of labor control. And I'll show you in a minute how is that happening here locally in Ventura County. Now, what this law did is actually increase the number of prisoners. So you have in the 1930s the building of the La Tuna detention facility in Texas. And you also have, yes.
Dr. I'm sorry to interrupt. The interpreters are asking if you could slow down a little, please.
Yes, sorry.
Any way the fan could be turned off? Is there
there's no fan.
Oh, there's some audio.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt.
I'll try to slow down. So essentially, in the 1930s, the U.S. Attorney prosecuted more than 44,000 cases of unlawful entry. And also in the 1930s, Mexicans comprised 85% of all immigration prisoners. And because of this bill, the U.S. Bureau of Prisons built 3 new prisons in El Paso, which is the La Tuna detention facility that you see here on the slide, and also built another facility in Tucson and then one in Los Angeles. You might know of it, Terminal Island in Los Angeles. As I mentioned, the 1929 was really important because this is what happened here locally is important. In the 1930s, you had the U.S. Border Patrol open up an office in Ventura County. And actually, it was run by 2 Border Patrol officials. And he actually was in charge of enforcing the 1920 law locally here in Ventura County and Santa Barbara County. And here you have an article that talks about how they were using this law. There was a strike in the 1937. One of the leaders of the strike was an immigrant by the name of Rodolfo Marquez. And he was arrested in violation of this 1929 deportation law. And because he was a leader of this strike, he was then deported. So you see why agribusiness employers like this law, because they can use it as a form of labor control to undermine any ability for labor to organize and to form a union. Also, you had in the slide, I'm showing you a newspaper, an article from a newspaper. Well, it's actually an announcement from La Voz de la Colonia. And this is the Spanish language newspaper that was printed in Santa Paula in the 1920s and 30s. And it's essentially an announcement to the readers about this law, the 1929 law, and how it's important for the readers to come together in a meeting. So it's really an announcement for a meeting that's going to be held where the Mexican consulate is going to be talking about this new law and how it's going to affect them. And so it's really important to note that this law was not widely publicized. So it was really the responsibility of the local papers, the Spanish language newspapers, to make sure that they're informed that this law may hurt them, because if they're arrested, they're going to be incarcerated. They're going to be charged with a misdemeanor, or if they get arrested twice with a felony, and ultimately they'll be deported. This 1920 law still continues to this day. Section 1325 of the 1920 law actually becomes the basis for the separation of parents and their children at the border. And so I think it's really important to make that connection from 1929 to today. Now, the movement to repeal began with Julian Castro, the Democratic candidate for president. In his platform, he called for the repealing of Section 1325, and he actually brought it up in a debate. So I'm showing the image of Castro really bringing it up as an issue. And I think it's important we bring this up as an issue today when we think about, the immigrant justice movement, how we really need to work to fight against the Section 1325 and 1326. So I want to thank you for your time. I hope I didn't go too fast. I wanted to share also a suggested reading link that was shared with you with books and other information. And I look forward to your questions. Thank you. I'll pass it on now to Brooke, who's going to talk about the I.C.E. and the role that MICOP is playing in abolishing I.C.E.
Thank you, Dr. Alamillo. That was a wonderful presentation, and I learned so much. Hello, everyone. Thank you to everyone for being present today and attending this event. My name is Brooke Lotz. I'm an immigration attorney with the Mixteco Indigena Community Organizing Project, also known as MICOP. We have offices in Oxnard and also Santa Maria. A little bit about our organization is that MICOP is an organization whose mission is to support, organize, and empower the indigenous migrant communities in California's Central Coast. MICOP offers a variety of free and low bono services to our community, including interpretation and translation in a variety of Indigenous languages. We assist to provide equitable healthcare access and outreach. That includes vaccines for COVID-19. MICOP works to raise mental health awareness. We provide domestic violence counseling and services. We are a champion of youth empowerment, and we offer multiple youth programs. We engage in labor organizing. We offer cultural awareness programs. And of course, we do some immigration services as well. And we are a local nonprofit leader in policy advocacy and community organizing. As Dr. Alamillo said, I will be speaking about the history of ICE. So following the World Trade Center attacks on 9/11, there was a bipartisan call in the US to reorganize all things security related. This resulted in the establishment of the Department of Homeland Security, known as DHS. And if you know anything about immigration law, it is full of a million acronyms. So I will try to limit the use of those as much as possible. The Department of Homeland Security collapsed 22 federal agencies into its fold, including those related to immigration, which therefore linked terrorism, security, and immigration forever in the political sphere moving forward. In 2003, what, as Dr. Alamillo said, the previous Immigration and Naturalization Services was divided into 3 new agencies. One is still today the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, which I consider is doing sort of affirmative immigration work, such as naturalization for citizenship, folks who need green cards, things of that nature. Also, the United States Custom and Border Protection, which is primarily focused on working along the border and at ports of entry, such as airports. And the Bureau of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which is today ICE. Previously, immigration had been overseen and administered by the Department of Justice, and that there are aspects today that remain so. So as we're talking about ICE, ICE has 2 main components. The first is enforcement and removal operations, and the second is Homeland Security Investigations, or HSI. The enforcement and removal operations is exactly what it sounds like. It enforces immigration laws, including detaining and removing people who violate those laws. And HSI investigates international criminal operations and organizations from the US, including things like the illegal trade of goods, weapons, drugs, and the smuggling and trafficking of people into the US. Going back to 2003, when ICE was created and the Department of Homeland Security, one of the goals of the Department of Homeland Security that was immediately established was the 100% removal rate of all removable aliens. So this, and a removable alien at this point is considered anyone who's violated any immigration law or is not currently in compliance with something, for example, an overstayed visa, like a tourist, maybe a student. This resulted in the Department of Homeland Security, a federal agency, developing partnerships with local and state agencies, and specifically police departments, which thus increased the number of individuals who were placed in removal or deportation proceedings, as well as the overall presence of the surveillance state. I also want to be clear that when I say removal proceedings, it's the same thing as deportation proceedings. So according to the data from the Detention Watch Network, The average daily population of detained immigrants increased from roughly 5,000 folks detained in 1994 to over 39,000 in 2017. Further, at the height of deportations in 2013, the Migration Policy Institute issued a report that said that the US government spends more on federal immigration enforcement than on all other principal federal criminal law enforcement agencies combined. Also, that the Customs and Border Protection and ICE referred more cases for federal prosecution than all Justice Department law enforcement agencies. Now, Professor Alamillo mentioned immigration enforcement as regulation of those who violate provisions of immigration laws. And he mentioned the creation of immigration laws as an administrative procedure. I just want to touch on that a little, because the way that I talk to folks about this when we are, when I have clients, I tell them that immigration violations are technically civil infractions. They are not criminal. And this is important because immigrants who are placed in removal proceedings do not receive the protections that an individual in criminal proceedings receives. So when you watch things like Law and Order or CSI, and you hear the Miranda warnings, those such as you have the right to an attorney, if you cannot afford one, one will be provided for you. Those are protections for the people in criminal proceedings. That's just one example, but immigrants who are placed in these removal proceedings do not receive those. Specifically, those who are in removal proceedings do not have the right to have an attorney provided to them. And what that means is that there are times that individuals who are in removal proceedings may not even know that they may have a defense to being deported. And further, many immigrants who are placed in removal proceedings may not even see an immigration judge. And this goes back to what Professor Alamillo was saying, which is they are thus denied due process, which is a core constitutional protection that is applied to people, not just citizens. Another issue is that immigration courts are not independent courts. So many courts in the US immigration system are independent, and judges are considered impartial, and they have the power to set their own agendas and dockets. However, the immigration courts are actually part of the Department of Justice, which is the very same law enforcement agency that is charged with prosecuting these immigration cases in federal court. What this means is that the judge, jury, and executioner, or deporter in this case, are all part of the same team, which itself threatens due process, impartiality, as I mentioned, and a fair and equal justice system. Under previous administrations, and this continues today, ICE has generally used enforcement priorities. So even with the 100% removal rate of removable aliens, the goal that I mentioned of the Department of Homeland Security, ICE and its agencies are constrained by the reality that detention and removal requires a large amount of government resources. As such, ICE is often focused on priorities, and the highest on that list is generally terrorists, followed by individuals with criminal records and repeat immigration offenders. So folks who have multiple orders of deportation or have violated the more egregious immigration laws. This is also, when I explain this to folks, I tell them that, the deportation bus going out of the United States only has so many seats. And we want to make sure that those seats are filled with the people who threaten perhaps the security or our country the most. Now, following the creation and increasing power of ICE, we see an increase in detention and removal of longstanding community members and the implementation of, again, mass raids. As Professor Alamillo said, mass raids have existed throughout immigration history, or the US history, in a variety of ways, but they became far more high profile. And we saw them focused on workplaces that employed mainly immigrants. So specifically, I'm thinking of Postville, Iowa in 2008, as well as the chicken processing plant raids in Mississippi in 2019, where almost, I believe, 600 immigrants were detained and ultimately most were deported. Under the Trump administration, there were also planned mass raids on Democratic cities and small Democratic here, blue cities, as a way of sort of enhancing that culture and that atmosphere of fear that Professor Alamillo alluded to. We also, during the, following the creation of ICE, saw the increase of public-private partnerships. So the use of these private detention centers for migrants, as opposed to only government facilities. Again, this is important because these private detention centers are not subject to the same rules and regulations as federal spaces. Following 2003, we also saw ICE increasing the arrest of immigrants in so-called safe spaces like courthouses. Immigrant advocates often argue that these arrests result in a chilling effect, with non-citizens without status being less likely to appear for their court hearings, participate in police investigations, even when they were the victims, or reporting crimes. It's these same policies that also culminated in the separation of families at the border, so the children in cages that we all heard about under the Trump administration. And although this was a policy enforced by the Customs and Border Protection Agency as it took place at the border, it did result in what is known as the Abolish ICE movement. So Abolish ICE was a loose coalition of organizations, politicians, and community members seeking to end the terrorizing practices of ICE and reform the immigration system in a variety of ways. I think that when you think about ICE as being one part of the Department of Homeland Security and one way in which we can think about the ways that our immigration laws are applied and enforced on our communities and throughout the country, the Abolish ICE movement is not as lawless as it may seem. I am here today, as I mentioned, as a representative and an attorney from MICOP, but I'm also a member of the ICE out of Ventura County Coalition, which is an organization that, among other things, is working to end the cooperation between local law enforcement and the federal deportation system. Michelle, our next panelist, will talk more about it. And thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Brooke. Espero que todos se encuentren bien y me imagino que...
Thank you, Brooke. I hope everyone is okay. And I imagine that you've learned a lot from Dr. Alamillo and from Brooke. My name is Michelle Carvalho, and I am part of CLU Ventura County. We are an organization made up of several different religions. We believe that everyone has the right to a happy life. Many religions have the basics of being a good neighbor, a good friend, and to be in community with others around you. This is why we are part of the ICE out of Ventura County Coalition. No one should fear deportation, and no family should be forcefully separated.
The ICE out of Ventura County Coalition, ICE fuera del Condado de Ventura quiere presionar a
The
nuestro
ICE Out of Ventura Coalition wants to put pressure on our local law enforcement to stop all communication with ICE. We want families to stay together. This year, we are preparing for the Truth Act. The Truth Act is a community forum that takes place every year and has been happening since 2017. Any law enforcement that has communication with ICE is required to hear what community members have to say in response. They are to be open to consider what people have to say in regards to the communication they maintain with ICE. Last year in November, people in our community in Ventura County have told our law enforcement they want ICE out of Ventura County. Over 40 people stated this. We want law enforcement to stop all communication with ICE. This would help us build a safer community. Families are afraid to report crimes to the police because of this ICE component. They are, of course, afraid of ICE. This is not fair. More so if they themselves are victims or if they are witnesses to a crime. In conclusion, I hope this information is interesting and relevant to you. And if you want to be part of this effort, please also, if you have any questions or if you want to know more about us, you can write them in the chat below your screen. Thank you so much. And now I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Mostafa.
Hi there. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Thank you. My name is Mustafa Nizam, and I am the Valley Outreach Manager of the Council on American-Islamic Relations at the Greater LA office. My territory extends from Hawthorne all the way to Santa Barbara County, including Ventura County, where much of my work has been happening since the lockdown and will continue. We are part of ICE out of Ventura County Coalition, and specifically on the Education and Outreach Committee. CAIR-LA is a grassroots civil rights organization and the largest Muslim civil rights organization in the country. CAIR-LA is celebrating its 25th year anniversary this year. Our vision is to be leading an advocate in justice for mutual understanding and to enhance understanding of Islam, protect civil liberties, promote justice, and empower American Muslims. ICE targets communities of color and people of color. The Muslim community is very diverse. We come from all over the world, from Southeast Asia to Latin America, from North Africa and the Middle East to the Philippines. Many of our community members are victims of ICE policies. There are hundreds of Muslims held in ICE detention, awaiting deportation to countries where they have escaped war, such as Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, Sudan, and Yemen. Countries that have been ruined because of our foreign policies. I want to share a story about a brother who is currently in ICE detention. His name is Omar Amin. He's part of the Sacramento Muslim community and is an Iraqi refugee who arrived here with his family in 2014. He had his life destroyed by the Trump administration when he was falsely accused of being an ISIS commander. He spent nearly 3 years wrongfully imprisoned in federal detention facility, awaiting extradition to Iraq and likely the death penalty. Against all odds, Omar won his legal battle just this past April 21st, 2021. Judge Brennan found that the government had no probable cause and denied Omar's extradition. Brennan said their case, the series of events is simply not plausible. Omar should have been freed that same night and reunited with his family, but instead was transferred to ICE custody, awaiting deportation proceedings. ICE has confirmed that it intends to try to send Omar back to Iraq through immigration proceedings, even though the government lost in federal court. ICE has now indicated that it wants to waste more years of Omar's life and your taxpayer dollars to go after Omar in immigration court on the exact same grounds that the federal judge threw out. And they want to keep Omar in custody the whole time. As of today, he is locked up in the ICE detention facility in Bakersfield. And quickly, I just wanted to add that CAIR-LA has an immigrants' rights center. And Brick also talked about MICOP on this as well. We have an immigrants' rights center where we offer free and or low cost legal services. Most of our cases have to do with asylees and as well as refugees. And if you know anybody that needs help with their applications, or if they're in a situation where they're undocumented and they need the help with the next step, give our office a call. I'll put the number in the chat, and we will do what's called an intake, and we'll be able to help you through that. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm going to turn this over to Nicolette Walker. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nicolette Walker Itza. My pronouns are she, her. And I'm a member of the leadership circle of SURJ Ventura County, which stands for Showing Up for Racial Justice Ventura County. It's our local chapter. We're a group of white people who are working together to undermine white supremacy. And we're working towards racial justice in Ventura County. We do this mainly through education. We have monthly meetings where we discuss different topics related to racial justice. We hear from local social and racial justice organizers and groups. We share and support local social and racial justice events. We have Whiteness 101 trainings, monthly newsletters with resources and events and calls to action. We also work on mobilizing our white community to direct action for events, calls to action that are led by Black, Indigenous, people of color. And we also work on community organizing and coalition building. And SURJ Ventura County is in solidarity with and part of ICE Out of Ventura County Coalition. We want to call attention to the disregard to fair and equitable due process for the immigrant community by the Ventura County Sheriff's Office. The Ventura County Sheriff's Office has been transferring people to Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, after they complete their jail sentence. And this creates a secondary level of punishment that only applies to immigrants. The Ventura County Sheriff's Office is doing this voluntarily, and yet they seem to turn a deaf ear to the community when we have asked them to commit to stopping this practice in the past. In November 2020, the Ventura County Board of Supervisors passed a resolution that declared racism a public health crisis, and the Sheriff's Office is participating in and perpetuating a racially unjust system of voluntarily cooperating with ICE. This system relies on racial profiling, which targets communities of color and is also affecting families, leaving children without a parent and causing fear and stress in not only undocumented people, but all of their loved ones as well. And we all need to stand for racial justice for immigrant communities here in Ventura County and demand that the Ventura County Sheriffs terminate all cooperation with ICE. So if you share our commitment to dismantling white supremacy here in Ventura County and working towards equal justice for all, you're invited to join us at one of our monthly meetings, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at SURJ-VC. Thank you, everyone, and I'll pass it to India.
Hola, buenas tardes a todos. Mi nombre es Nidia. Gracias por estar aquí.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nidia. Thank you for being here. And thank you for inviting me to speak. I am a policy advocate with cause in Santa Paula. I'm also an immigrant from Puebla. I was raised in Los Angeles and I've been here in Oxnard for 2 years. And today I wanted to speak about how immigration policies affect health and particularly mental health of our immigrant undocumented community. So a little bit about CAUSE. CAUSE is an organization that works with uh, working immigrants and working families here in Ventura County, mainly farm workers. And we work on in different policy areas. And as organizers, we have seen how narratives, anti-immigrant narratives and stereotypes affect our community and their health. And given the political climate that we have currently, undocumented immigrants live with a fear of deportation, which limits access and use of social services and healthcare, and therefore it limits the social integration of our immigrant communities. What we have seen is that as immigrant communities and through our own experiences and through social media or the media, we have seen examples of how different agencies, in particular the police, has helped ICE has helped hold the raids in our communities. And we have a lot of examples of these agencies working together. And our community sees these collaborations. And as a community, we have learned that we can't we can't trust uh, immigration agencies or the authorities, and particularly the police, and so particularly that we can't trust the government. And so with a common objective of keeping our families together, we have created a network in which we limit the government from accessing our communities, and so or the authorities from accessing our communities. So during the Trump administration, we saw that our immigrant communities were attacked in various ways. One of these was through public charge, in which immigrants who were using social services where this act was being seen as a public charge that could limit opportunities for immigrants in the future for legalization. And so all of these policies that we've seen against immigrants makes it so that our communities become more isolated and therefore less able to access the resources we need. We have also seen deportations in our immigrant communities, and these cause cycles and patterns of trauma, not only for the people that are deported, but for families and the children and the community at large. So for example, people who are deported end up in a detention center in which we see a lot of human rights violations. we have examples of these or documented examples of these violations. Children experience family separation. This matter of separating families is very traumatic. And in general, this affects the community because these are people who are a part of our community, who have been here, or who are oftentimes have been here for quite some time. And these are people that have, are employed here, have jobs, have friends, neighbors, and are part of this community. And so I just want to conclude saying that it's very important for us to come together to put an end to deportation. I've shared a lot about the fear of deportation that people, that our communities have, because it's a fear of being separated from their family, and it's something we can put an end to. As some of my peers have shared, CAUSE is also part of the ICE out of ICE out of Ventura County coalition, and we are part of this coalition because we have seen how deportations affect everyone in the community. And as I mentioned earlier, we can put a stop to this. So if you want more information to find out how you can be part of this coalition and stop ICE transfers, or how to just put an end, do away with this agency's presence in our county, I'm going to include my contact info below. And there's many opportunities for us to support our immigrant community. So thank you. I'm going to hand it over to Effie.
Thank you, Nidia, and thank you to all the speakers tonight. Hello, everyone. My name is Effie Sklavenitis. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the policy advocate and outreach director for Buen Vecino. Buen Vecino is a nonprofit community organization that was created in 2017. The vision of Buen Vecino is to cultivate an environment where the human dignity of every person is respected, where all people are treated with compassion, have equal rights, and have the opportunity to participate and contribute to our society. Earlier this year, Buen Vecino joined with the organizations you've already heard from tonight and several more to form the ICE out of Ventura County Coalition. There are currently more than 15 organizations on the coalition and many individual community members as well. The ICE out of Ventura County Coalition recognizes that immigrants are integral, contributing, and essential community members in Ventura County. We believe in the right of families to stay together without the threat of being detained or deported from their loved ones. The coalition's current objectives are to end the practices of cooperation between law enforcement and ICE in Ventura County and throughout California. At the county level, we are calling on the Ventura County Sheriff's Office to end its ongoing voluntary cooperation with ICE's efforts to target, detain, and deport our neighbors. When a person who has completed serving a sentence in a county jail and would otherwise be released to return to their family, they should not be transferred to the custody of ICE due to their immigration status. Some of you may know about the Senate Bill 54, also known as the California Values Act. While SB 54, as stated by the ACLU, ensures that, quote, no state and local resources are used to assist federal immigration enforcement, and that our schools, our hospitals, and our courthouses are safe spaces for everyone in our community, end quote, the bill did not end all cooperation between law enforcement and ICE. SB 54 placed limits on such cooperation, but left open major loopholes that have allowed active cooperation to continue. We are calling on Ventura County to follow the lead of numerous other counties that have already gone beyond the limits of SB 54 and have ended voluntary cooperation with ICE. These counties include Alamillo, Contra Costa, Humboldt, Los Angeles, Marin, San Joaquin, and Santa Clara counties. Ending ICE transfers in these counties has not resulted in more ICE raids in those communities. In fact, Sheriff Alex Villanueva, the 33rd Sheriff of Los Angeles County, has also stated that there is no greater threat to public safety than 1 million undocumented immigrants who are afraid to report crime out of fear of deportation and having their families torn apart. Our coalition is also concerned by the unnecessary expenses the Sheriff's Office cooperation with ICE cost our county. The Sheriff's Truth Act Forum report detailed a list of activities their offices carry out to work with ICE. These tasks incur time and expenses. As part of our research, a coalition member submitted a Public Records Act request to find out what the costs are. The reply received in writing states that, quote, "The Sheriff's Office does not track the times for the tasks you are inquiring about, nor do we track the costs associated with these tasks," end quote. The same letter also stated that the process of calculating statistics for the Truth Act Forum is, quote, "extremely time intensive," end quote. If the Sheriff's Office would follow the lead of other counties that have already ended voluntary cooperation with ICE, there would be no need to hold Truth Act forums, and the cost of the extremely time-intensive process would not exist. At the state level, ICE out of Ventura County coalition members have been working with a statewide advocacy group to support passage of a bill called the Vision Act, the Voiding Inequality and Seeking Inclusion for Our Immigrant Neighbors Act, which is endorsed by more than 80 organizations and 20 legislative co-authors. This bill will ensure that when an individual has earned their release from state or local custody, they are not transferred by state, county, or local authorities to ICE detention and are instead able to return to their loved ones. The Vision Act is about fairness. If an individual who is an immigrant and an individual who is born in the US are convicted of the same crime and both serve their time and earn their release, it is unjust that the individual who is not born in the US does not get released, whereas the individual who was does. This is why detention and deportation are called a double punishment for people who are immigrants and refugees. People who have completed their sentences are punished again for not being born in the US. The Vision Act also goes further to ensure that local and state tax dollars are not used to funnel people who are immigrants into harmful immigration detention and separate immigrant families and communities. We are happy to share with you all that this past Thursday, the Vision Act passed in the California Assembly. Of our 3 local assembly members, Assemblymember Bennett voted A, Assemblymember Irwin abstained from voting, and Assemblymember Valladares voted no. The Vision Act will now progress to the Senate. Our coalition will be working to get it passed and adopted into law, and we invite you to join us. As we finish our presentation and open space for questions and answers, we would like to leave you with a call to action. You will receive a handout by email after this event with resources to take action. The resources will include recommended readings from Dr. Alamillo. Please take a look at these readings to deepen the information gained here tonight. The handout will also have links to the organizations represented at tonight's event. Please follow and support them. If you would like to engage with the ICE out of Ventura County Coalition, or if your organization is interested in joining the coalition, the handout will include a link to contact us. Finally, the handout will include links to organizations working to curb the abuses of ICE and to hold the Biden-Harris administration accountable for pledging to, quote, have a fair and humane immigration system, end quote. Thank you all for being here tonight. I would now like to return to our hosts.
Thank you, Effie. And thank you to all our presenters who are staying here to take your questions now. I'm going to lift up a comment that came in from Sherry. while Dr. Alamillo was speaking, she said, my ancestors came through Ellis Island. Bravo to Liliana for getting her green card. And a question for Dr. Alamillo from Shannon. Prior to the Chinese Exclusion Act, what sort of restrictions, if any, were there to immigration to the US?
That's a good question. So before 1882, you did have a law, the 1875 Page Law, and this law prohibited the importation of unfree laborers and women brought in for immoral purposes, which meant at that time, really that Chinese women brought in for prostitution were prohibited from entry. So it was very much a targeted against Chinese women. So you had that law, but before 1875, you really didn't have federal immigration laws passed. You mostly had states that passed their own laws following the Civil War. And they were mostly laws that, would regulate how many could enter within a state, but really no enforcement of these laws. So really, when we think about federal immigration laws and restrictions, it really begins in the 1880s, starting with the 1882 Exclusion Act.
Thank you, Dr. Alamillo. Now we have a question from Brian for Brooke. The county said on their website that individuals had to have government issued ID driver's license, birth certificate, bank statement, tax return, utility bill, all shockingly tone deaf to the average undocumented workers. It was only after inquiring via email that we got additional information indicating anyone 16 or older who lives or works in Ventura County is eligible for a vaccine. A person would just need to show proof of living or working in Ventura County. We've been working with community-based organizations providing mobile vaccine opportunities, pop-up events, and direct outreach, sharing information about vaccines. Thank you, Ashley. Is there anything allies can do to help raise awareness of vaccine availability, or are there organizations that have this handled?
I think that is a really great question. And I know that MICOP has been working very hard to address that outreach that you mentioned. I think I may have mentioned that MICOP, one of our greatest functions is that we have an Indigenous radio station, or it's a radio station that broadcasts in several Indigenous languages to the Oxnard and Ventura areas. And a big focus recently has been on spreading the word about COVID vaccines. We've also done pop-up clinics. We have a mobile clinic that has been bringing vaccines to folks. What I haven't heard of folks getting turned away because of lack of identification. I know most folks that I know in Central California County or the California coastal area have actually been asked for very little documentation to show their eligibility or identification for vaccines. I think that's an excellent point though. And if you would like, I will put my email here in the chat and I can connect you with our communications associate and directors who are spearheading our vaccine event. I know, again, our team has been working around the clock, as it were, to vaccinate agricultural workers and frontline workers and letting folks know who don't speak English or Spanish that the vaccine is available to them as a priority category. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, and thank you for that work. Reminder, if you want to ask a question, you can type it into the chat. You can put the name of the person that you want to respond if you have someone in mind. Another question for Brooke. You spoke about the judge, jury, and deporter all being wrapped up into one process that didn't seem in keeping with a truly just justice system? What's the solution?
You know, that's a great question. And this is very, actually there is a, I want to say it's called the Council of Retired Immigration Judges, although I might be making it sound grander or more like a Lord of the Rings thing than it actually is. But it's a group of retired immigration judges who have penned recently I believe within the last few years, a request to make immigration courts independent courts. So they're under the Constitution. Courts are created in different ways. And as I mentioned, the current immigration courts are administered by the Department of Justice and the Executive Office for Immigration Review. So the Executive Office for Immigration Review is the agency charged with immigration courts, and it's closely tied to ICE. And immigration courts could be made independent so that they're not as partisan or impartial, or I'm sorry, they're not as partial as they are currently. Many immigration judges today are actually former prosecutors from the Department of Homeland Security. And that, you know, without going too much into my own experiences and long political rants, I would just say that there is a lot of evidence out there that judges are, you know, often defer to the government as opposed to the immigrant in these cases. And judges are supposed to be neutral arbitrators. The other issue is that the Executive Office for Immigration Review can therefore sort of do things like put quotas on immigration judges and sort of force them to change how they manage their caseload, which is very problematic. So under the Trump administration, one thing we saw was that immigration judges had a sort of quota put onto them. And that can be extremely problematic. Many immigration court cases, and I'm thinking particularly of asylum cases, can be extremely complicated and difficult to adjudicate and to present in a court of, you know, allegedly law. And because of this, there are some things, you know, oftentimes people are granted continuances, or maybe they get an expert witness to testify on their country conditions, or maybe they're actually the majority of immigration proceedings are conducted in a different language. And when judges have quotas, what that means is that when they are blocked out for a 4-hour hearing, if somebody's speaking another language, you know, that person is really only getting 2 hours to defend themselves or present their case, because half of that time is taken up with interpretation. So allowing to have independent immigration courts would, you know, result in more due process and, like I said, a more fair and equitable justice system for immigrants who are in that position.
Oh, I'd like to hear more about that sometime. Thank you. Thank you, Kim Stevenson, put into the chat. You can volunteer at Swap Meet Justice tomorrow, June 6th, and then the last Sunday of each month at the Oxnard College Swap Meet. Show up at 8:30 for training booth next to the bookstore. Help people with their immigration, citizenship, DACA, voter registration, etc. paperwork. There's always an immigration attorney present for the complicated issues. Michelle, did you want to say anything more?
Sure, and I'll go ahead and respond in Spanish for those who prefer Spanish. Voy a repetir todo en español para los que necesitan español.
I'm going to repeat everything in Spanish. Question is about The question asked for more information on swap meet justice. We
Cada
do
mes.
this every last Sunday of the month at Oxnard College. And tomorrow, Sunday, June 6th, we will be holding a swap meet justice event in which we will have volunteer attorneys helping fill out and complete immigration applications, including DACA renewals and initial renewals if you are eligible. They're also doing permanent resident applications and citizenship applications. And there are many folks have gone to Swap Meet Justice and who applied for their citizenship and are now citizens. So if you know anybody who could benefit from this, they can go to the swap meet. We will be there from 8 a.m. till 3 p.m. And if you would like to be a volunteer, you can also go at 8 a.m. and this way you can receive the materials
Si no
you
saben
need to help out. If you don't know English, you can still help. We need all the help we can. So once more, I know that the
necesitan una vez
link has
más,
been sent in the chat, but I'll send it once more. You can also translate this webpage into Spanish if you need it. And if you have any further questions, you can send me a direct message as well. Or you can email me. I'll write my email in the chat if you all have any questions.
Thank you. And Reverend Betty Stapleford has this question for anyone. What do you see as the positive effects of the Vision Act that recently passed in the House of California Legislature? Perhaps someone who hasn't had a question yet would like to take that.
Do you mind if I answer?
Absolutely, go ahead.
Okay,
No, I don't.
so this is one of the bills that CAIR California was a co-sponsor along with a lot of organizations here. Now, what it really showed me is how quickly we organized and mobilized, called our assembly members and asked them to vote yes. From San Diego all the way to San Francisco, we made a difference because we came together very quickly and we had one mission to get the Vision Act passed.
Anyone else on benefits? Thank you.
I can also talk a little bit on that. So CAS is also a co-sponsor, and like Mustafa mentioned, you know, here in Ventura County, we were able to get yes, you know, Assembly Member Steve Bennett to vote yes. And unfortunately, you know, Jackie Irwin abstained. But, you know, some of the benefits that we see is that it will close some of the loopholes that were left by SB 54. And it, you know, it would end the double punishment that many immigrants face. You know, like after completing their sentences, they're usually transferred to ICE. And so it would end that. And we see that as something, you know, that would end transfers. And yeah, I think so. I think overall it would close loopholes left by SB 54 and continue to prevent ICE, you know, and ICE being in our communities and our jails, right? Yeah, and I'll pass it off back to the host actually.
There's a follow-up question on this, Nidia. Does calling Jackie Irwin now do anything helpful?
So I think, you know, calls and emails are always really helpful. That's what God, you know, and that's how we were able to assure that Assemblymember Bennett voted yes. But I think, yeah, I think with Jackie Irwin, it's very, you know, a unique situation. I think a lot of us are aware of, you know, that she's very moderate, and so I think that, you know, calling her office does show that there are, folks in her, her constituents. There are constituents that believe that immigrants should not be subject to double punishment and should, you know, have equitable rights as citizens. And so I think calling her does show that, right? Because responses that we've received from her is that, you know, her community does not want this, right? And that's not true. And so I think, you know, calling does do that. But I think at the end of the day, we've seen again and again how Jackie Irwin has voted, and that has not been in favor of the immigrant community, right? Or of people of color in general. And so I think there could be more done, right, than just calling. And I think just overall there needs to be a lot of, like Jackie Irwin needs to be held accountable.
And to hear from more of us, it sounds like. Thank you, Nidia.
I would like to add to that.
Sorry, go ahead.
I just want to thank Mustafa and Nidia for what they spoke on. And also, you never know how many calls or which call will be the one to sway an assembly member from a no vote to an abstention. So the fact that the vote was not blocked is also one step. It's not the step that we are looking for, but it is a step. And hopefully the more individuals who call, the more individuals who email, the more voices from our community that our assembly members hear from, that will hopefully impact them, as is always the hope. And in regards to the question about the Vision Act, I just want to add that this is a very needed piece of legislation, as are most pieces of legislation that are positive in regards to respecting human dignity and due process. But, you know, this is a unique opportunity for California to set a precedent for other states to look towards and to follow. Thank you.
What a good point. Thank you. I'm going to interject this as it's still regarding the Vision Act. Is there a way to get updates on the status of the Vision Act?
Yes, so if you would like more information on the Vision Act and what our coalition is working on, there is a form, a Google form that you can fill out, and we can email you more information. It is in the chat right now. I can also put a link in the chat with more information from the I.C.E. out of California Coalition as well.
Thank you. Question from Linda Carl for anyone. Though the public charge rule was deemed ineffective, many migrant families fear accessing needed services due to what they think would be the repercussions of receiving public assistance. What, if anything, have the organizations represented tonight done to help spread the awareness?
I can speak a little on that as well. So as cause, we were doing outreach from the, even before it was reversed. We were just doing outreach to inform the community about, about the public charge changes. And so that's what we've continued to do. We've made graphics that are available on our website, our social media, Facebook. And so we've made graphics that are accessible to immigrants. And so, as I mentioned, we've done outreach in like South Oxnard, East Ventura County, East Ventura, sorry. Yeah, I think, we continue to speak on this, and every time that we are you know, speaking to immigrants, we mentioned, right, the reversal, and that, you know, and we encourage, I think it's really important to encourage immigrants to use the resources that are available to them. Because I think, like I mentioned, there's a lot of fear around using resources, but there are resources that are available to us, right? That you know, we should. It's really important to encourage folks to use these resources, especially in times of need.
Can I interject here as well? We, with CAIR-LA, have been trying to point people of the undocumented community in the right direction towards accredited representatives, towards immigration attorneys. There's lots of questions out there right now about public charge and assistance and what they can do for their status or to help their status. And if anyone is in communication with someone that they know is undocumented or someone who has contact with the undocumented community, that it's important to seek the help from accredited representatives, immigration attorneys, or again, organizations like CAUSE who can point you in the right direction for more assistance as well. We have a lot of clients. I'm a paralegal at the law office of Vanessa Frank as well. So I have firsthand experience of clients who have been injured by notaries that they've gone to, or people like tax preparers who say they prepare immigration documents and give them the wrong advice. So I just want to go ahead and just put that out there in case anyone knows. Or if you have any more questions, you can contact CAIR-LA in our link. You can also access our email. Because it is important, and there's lots of questions and follow-up questions to the answers that we normally get. So if you can inform yourselves more, or if you know of anyone else who needs that type of information, they can reach out to us directly.
I'd like to also add that to the question about what outreach has been done, that MICOP has worked pretty, as soon as the change to the public charge rule came out, as it sort of still exists in a weird form, but we worked to spread that information on our radio channel. And also, as Michelle mentioned, with the law office of Vanessa Frank, we do Facebook Live events, and we also spoke about it there. So I think most of our community organizations have been working really hard to make sure that folks are informed and aware of their rights to these resources and benefits.
Anyone else? Okay, another question. This is from Karina for anyone. What kind of impact has COVID had on immigration? Is there anything being done to help families who are still in detention centers?
I can speak to some of this from an immigration attorney perspective, which is that currently families are not being held in detention centers unless there's some brief and very small exceptions. But with the current administration, that has been one of their goals, is not to hold families in detention for extended periods of time. There are federal regulations in place about children. And those also, if anyone has heard about the alleged surge of migrant children at the border, there are three main ways I see that COVID has four main ways. So I'll make it quick. The first is that the Trump administration enacted Title 42 laws, which sort of limited the all kinds of immigration entrance into the United States. And so folks were not, we had fewer people who were going through the sort of affirmative process, such as applying through a visa through their family member or employer, being allowed in. The southern border was basically shut down for a long time under Trump, under the guise of a sort of COVID-19 security measure, basically. The second way is that in many detention centers across the United States, particularly at the border, there were many COVID-19 infections and outbreaks. So that's another way that it was affected. The third is that, like everything under the pandemic, immigration agencies and courts were slowed down because many things were closed and folks were working remotely. And so what that means is that essentially everything that already took a long time was now taking even longer. Most immigration hearings were canceled due to COVID-19 for the past year and a half for folks who were not detained. And the processing time for all applications increased exponentially. And then I would also say, specifically, when we look at the sort of fear rhetoric that has surrounded some of the Asian immigrant population and Pacific Islander population of immigrants, that has been, you know, something that we can all see on the news, right? It resulted in an uptick of, you know, hate crimes and racist rhetoric that really affected that both, you know, non-immigrant, but also immigrant population.
I think we have time for one more question. Lisa would like, maybe Nidia, could you speak briefly about the Camp Roberts status?
Yeah, I'm actually not too familiar with it, so I don't know if anyone else would like to speak more on it. What I think, you know, the little bit that I do know is that, you know, there was a proposal to expand detention centers and use Camp Roberts as a detention center to house children, right, as due to this quote unquote increase of children. However, I do know that that now is on hold. And so there is advocacy being done with some outside of California partners around this, and so it seems like those plans are on hold for now. You know, now the reasoning being that, you know, this you know, there's been a decrease of children, and so that need to be housed. And so I think, yeah, thank you for bringing that up. You know, I think this is in SLO County, and so it would be really good as, you know, 805 community to support whatever actions there may be to stop this.
We have Jan Meslin here from SLO. Jan, you want to share some information?
Yeah, I'm part of two coalitions, actually, the Not Camp Roberts Coalition, and CAUSE is also a member of that. And Camp Roberts is actually partly in Monterey County, so it covers both SLO County and Monterey County. And the reason we don't want the children there is because it's on a military base where it's just awful. So secure oriented, very hard for the public and oversight and all that. There's one already where children are in Fort Bliss, Texas, in El Paso, Texas. You may have heard of what it's like inside, and nobody can get in. Also, it's very remote up here. It's about 50 minutes north of me, but it's just really hot and very remote. So it's half an hour away from the nearest hospital, and it's just far away from immigration attorneys and, you know, very many. And so the good news is that our two Congress people, we have Monterey County and here in SLO County, just let us know 2 days ago that it's off the table. And so the children will not be housed here for now. So now these coalitions are getting together and deciding our next steps, because we don't want them to be here in the future either. So that's where we are. But I think there's another coalition called Shut Down Camp Roberts that's more national groups, and kind of led by Siren, and I think Detention Watch Network is part of that. And they also were pushing to not have it here. So we won this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan, and thank you everybody active on this. Our Reverend Betty Stapleford has asked to say a few words about the impacts of COVID too. Can you unmute yourself, Betty?
I think I am. Does everybody hear me? Okay, just very quickly, CAUSE for a number of years has led visits to Adelanto, the detention center in Adelanto. And of course, that was cut off during COVID. One of the positive things, though, I have to say this is, kind of a strange positive, is that many of the detainees at Adelanto were released. Now, the problem is that they're not released forever, but the population there was 1,400. It's now below 200. So that's a really good thing. We keep in touch with them via mail, not as effective as some other means, and hopefully we'll be able to go back and visit. But what my wish is that we will not have to go back and visit them there because those detention centers will be closed. But I think the COVID has had a positive effect on many of these folks are now out with their families, at least for now. And there are some local groups like Adelante Comunidad Conejo that is providing food for families here that may have someone detained or may simply be suffering some economic difficulties. So there are some lights at the end of the tunnel that are not a moving train.
Reverend Betty, thank you for that. And as we wrap up here, I ask Dr. Alamillo, do you have any final concluding words or thoughts for us?
I just want to thank everybody. I learned so much from all the different work the organizations are doing to support immigrants in the 805. I think it's amazing. The Vision Act passed, at least in Assembly. Now we need to push for, for the next step, get Erwin to vote yes on it. And yeah, I'm just really grateful to be part of this community. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, everybody, please help me in thanking Dr. Jose Alamillo, our committed panelists, our interpreters, and the whole community forum team, Reverend Betty and Reverend Nika. And you can use your reaction signals to send a little love there. We are so grateful, not only for your presence here and contributions here tonight, but for all the work you are doing on this cause. Thank you all for joining us tonight. If you'd like to learn more about Chalice UU and check out what's coming up for our Sunday 10 a.m. virtual services, please check us out at www.chaliceu.org. Thank you all again. We'll be emailing the handout with the resources and links for further information and action, all the links you saw tonight in the chat box. And bless you. Go in peace.